Well, after researching so many years, the Beatles, and after writing this book, which Beatle do you fancy the most now?
Well, of course, when I started this book, for me it was Paul McCartney, because I was a musician myself, and Paul is really the true musician of the group. He can play guitar, played guitar better than George. He's a piano player, which I was, guitar player. He invented the rock and roll bass, and he had that amazing voice. But as I got to know Paul more through the book, as I got to know him as a person and through his dealings as a Beatle, that wore off. And then I became interested in John, because everybody's interested in John. John's the most complex man. He was dark, frustrated, shot from the hip, really an interesting character. But John was also kind of a nasty guy as well, and so that wore off for me as well as the book went on. Then I gravitated to George, and George, of course, is a quiet guy, maybe a little too quiet for me. And by the time I finished working on the book, 8.5 years later, I realized that the true hero of the Beatles story was Ringo Starr. He was a lovely guy. The other Beatles, they loved him unconditionally. He never had a bad word to say about anybody. He loved being a Beatle. He was a fantastic drummer. And he only ever wanted what was best for the group. And so Ringo, I think, is the true hero of this book. And for me, he came out at the end as being really one of the character who I could identify with the most. And funny enough, I found out that when the Beatles first came to the United States, they were selling those buttons, I love John, I love Paul. The I love Ringo buttons outsold the others 5-1. So maybe Ringo has all the magic of the story. Maybe he isn't just the luckiest man alive.
Which he stated himself, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And, okay, well, you said Ringo, and then Paul, John, and George. How come they wore off for you? How come? Can you describe it a little bit more? Why Paul McCartney?
Well, Paul for me is the one Beatle who is, I think, the strangest character in the book. He loves being a Beatle. He loves being a lovable mop top. Everything John hated. John wasn't interested in that at all. Paul is the man who plays to the press. He's very slick, very clever. John and George got to a point where they hated being in the same room that he was in. Paul is controlling, Paul is manipulative. It gets to a point in the Beatles story, and in the book quite apparently, where Paul is calling all the shots. He tells them what to play in the studio, how to play it, when they're going to play it. And he becomes almost so controlling that he's antagonistic. The other Beatles felt it, and of course I felt it as well as I was writing the book.
But can you imagine what is happening now with him, with Heather Mills, what she is saying? Can you comprehend a little bit that she is saying?
Well, I don't really know the Heather Mills situation so well. I can tell you that I do know quite a bit about how Paul was with Linda, and because of that, it makes it unusual to hear the stories coming from Heather Mills. Paul was a loving husband, he was a good husband, he was a great father. Is he a control freak? Yes, he's a control freak, but for some reason, Linda McCartney knew exactly what to do with that. Whereas I don't think Heather Mills did. She's a very difficult personality, and I think it was like two magnets of the same polarity, just repelling.
Yeah.